Hey, friends, greetings and welcome back to Becoming Undone, the podcast for those who dare bravely, risk mightily, and grow relentlessly. Join me, Toby Brooks, as I invite a new guest each week, where we examine how high achievers can transform from falling apart to falling into place. Over the years, one of the common themes in the show has been big pivots, big shifts, and in particular, athletes and military folks seem to have gone through really some similar processes in that transition out of the early part of their career. So I'm thrilled to have Quang Pham joining us today, and he's an entrepreneur and an author, and looking forward to hearing your story. Quang, thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, so I loved reading through your speaker kit. There were a lot of great things in there. I think a lot of similarities between what we talk about in the show and the writing that you've done, and certainly some of the work in your past. You've lived what you call the American underdog journey, from a child refugee to a Marine Corps aviator to now biotech CEO. When you look back, what would you say is the single most defining moment that helped shape how you see yourself today?
Well, it was, just over 50 years ago, April 1975, Saigon, the former capital of South Vietnam, was falling apart. I just finished the fifth grade, 10 years old. I had three sisters. Late father, was a senior South Vietnamese Air Force pilot trained in the United States starting in the late 50s. So long history back um, with the Vietnam War. And my mother was a school teacher. And on that dark Saigon April 1975 morning, our lives changed. And so that was the first turning point where, to help define who I am, I became, um, an American citizen, um, a Marine, an entrepreneur. But that night in Saigon, I was about to become a countryless boy, uh, going to America without knowing anybody in America, without knowing the language, the culture, the temperature. To me, Americans were advisors. They were big, they smiled, they were there for the whole war. And then towards the end, they started to disappear. Next thing I know, I landed in Arkansas in May of 1975.
What a culture shock. So, how old were you when this all went down?
10. And
10 years
so
old.
10 years old. So what I saw defined my life because, for the 10 years I lived, especially the last 3 years in Vietnam, the latter part of the Vietnam War, when the Americans had withdrew in 72, and then the POWs, like the late Senator John McCain, came home and they signed the peace accord. So the war kind of was quiet. And then, little did we know the North Vietnamese was planning that big invasion in Saigon, failed in 55 days. So the big part for me was I saw my father take care of his family, amid his country falling apart. His president had fled. His commanding officers were gone. Our neighbors were gone. He put us on that second flight out of Saigon, and he stayed. So first of all, I saw him do the duty. Second part was the surprise that he didn't come with us. And it took 17 years before I saw him again. So I think a sense of duty, a sense of pride, and I followed in his footsteps.
Yeah. Fascinating story. What would you say your biggest, wildest dreams were when you were 10, 11 years old, first setting foot in Arkansas, literally a world apart culturally, all of those transitions? What did success look like to 11-year-old Quang?
Yeah. So success looked like, lining up for a meal each day, and every day going to the refugee camp center where we'd listen to BBC News to find out what happened. We knew the war had ended, the communists had won, but there were hundreds and thousands, millions of families torn apart, didn't know where their parents were. In our case, my mother didn't know where her husband was. She came to America with four young kids, 11, 10, 7, and 3. Didn't have anybody. So the second instance that I saw that shaped my life was my mom made a decision when we were in Arkansas that they wanted us, to leave the camp because so many people were leaving Vietnam by boat still. So we had to have an American sponsor, or we could have gone to Australia, Canada, in France because Vietnam had been a colony of France. So I already had 4 years of French as a second language. So we had aunts, uncles, relatives, probably about 25, 30 family members. And at the last minute, she said, no, we don't know anything about America, but the French will never see you kids as equal. So we're going to America. We're staying.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. That you have to respect the vision there and the fact that it literally changed the course of your life. You
Yeah,
find
bam,
yourself,
bam.
yeah. You find yourself in the American military as a Marine and eventually as an aviator. Talk me through that process from how you go from a refugee to deciding to be a part of the American military.
Well, since you have a lot of sports and athletes, and I never was a professional, I didn't play college sports. I did play high school basketball. I did play Little League baseball. So the big shock you asked me, I didn't answer, was 1976. I joined Little League baseball. Started practicing my English, made a lot of friends. Didn't get one hit. 1977, I became a starter. Hit the game-winning hit. We win the league. Became a Little League All-Star.
Wow.
So transformation. So sports was such a big part of my early years in America. I made a lot of friends. And I think I learned that the playing field was equal. And the kids who got picked on pickup basketball game, pickup football games in the neighborhood, and eventually the teams, they got picked. You know, it didn't matter what color you were. Can you play? Can you produce results? So I kind of learned that effort and result, but I didn't really put it together until I wrote my book. The Marines. Growing up in Saigon, I lived in a military base the last 3 years of my life. So, you know, I was a military brat. You know, my father was a senior pilot. I saw planes take off, land, arm, refuel, aircraft shot down, parachute, the whole thing. When I got to America, I never imagined that America would trust, you know, a 5'8" kid out of high school going to UCLA, barely 140 pounds, you know, dripping wet, that America would trust me to, you know, allow me to go to officer candidate school, allow me to go to flight school, earn my wings, and then fly troops in the Persian Gulf War, and then off an amphibious ship and become an aircraft commander and take charge and serve, you know, 10 years, between 7 years on active duty and another, actually, 5 years in the reserve. So it was tremendous. And that's how the journey was. It was a journey to pursue my childhood dream, but I look back, it was to pay back for my citizenship and honor my family. The flying was bonus. You know, I never became an airline pilot, but the flying was what I wanted to do as a kid. And just looking back, it's just an incredible, it's an incredible country. You know, this is the #1 country for underdogs. You know, if you don't have the name, if you don't have the culture, if you don't have education, if you don't have money, you can become whoever you want to become if you focus on effort and results and define your own success, you know, and be realistic about, you know, your dreams. And I've never been a dreamer or a visionary. I was all about the mindset, which means taking action. Okay. Just don't talk about writing a book, write it. You want to be a pilot, go practice, take some flying lessons. You want to play better baseball, go practice. You want to be a better golfer, go to the driving range. It just doesn't happen. You have to take action.
Yeah, I love just that mindset and the ownership. I love the idea that sports is outcome based. It's not related to, in some ways it can be, but eventually the talent rises to the top. And I've seen, you know, even in Little League instances where who your dad is or who the politics are,
Yes.
yeah, that can influence it. But ultimately, if you're a talent, you will find a way to be on the court or on the field. And I love that outcome based structure.
You know, so as I became an adult, I followed Ichiro. He was a little bigger than me. It was just an amazing career. He just got into the Hall of Fame. But the biggest, I grew up an LA Dodgers fan, you know, listening to Vince Scully and watching, you know, the 70, you know, the late 70s, you know, watching, you know, I saw the World Series last year. And you know, to see the Dodgers and look at all the different ethnic players, it's just you know, sports is just beyond what it did for me as a kid, but to see how global sports and bringing people together, just watching 60,000 people at Dodger Stadium screaming, you know.
Well, I don't remember it. I was born in LA. My mom was a huge Dodgers fan. So my earliest memories of baseball were Vince Scully, you know, Steve Garvey, Ron Say, Fernando,
Dave Lopes. Yes.
And so certainly connect on that in that regard. I also hear some Kobe Bryant in you, and the idea that you develop excellence through action, and that Mamba mentality certainly is I equate that with LA and
It
with
was,
kind of
you know,
the Lakers.
when Kobe passed away, I was a sadness in me because I flew helicopters for the Marines in Orange County, and I had flown over those LA areas up to five, up to the 101, and we were flying there just before the LA riots in 1992. So I knew exactly where he had traveled from Orange County through downtown LA. I've hovered over the LAPD because they couldn't take a Marine helicopter. We practiced our landings, but we could never put our whole helicopter down, 25,000 pounds. Uh, and the day I heard of his passing, for me as a fan of the Lakers, of Kobe, but also as a helicopter who's flown over Southern California for a decade, um, it was a sad day. And it was a sad day learning it was a single pilot aircraft flying in through. I understood it. I never opined about it, but it was challenging. It was a challenging time for me just to hear what had happened and then just to find out the findings, over the ensuing months and year.
Yeah, for sure. As I read your bio, I am moved by the magnitude of the transitions in your life from refugee to Arkansas. From Arkansas, you end up at UCLA. From UCLA, you end up in the Marine Corps. From the Marine Corps, you end up in biotech. Those are not small steps. What would you attribute your bravery in making those huge transitions and jumps? And I mean, even from the humble beginnings where you said success consisted of standing in line and being fed, to now being in charge of incredibly important, uh, whether that's biotech work or the scale has just mushroomed, and that's not something you typically see on that in that order of magnitude.
What I did tell, I have to say it. Yeah, I did meet the late Coach John Wooden in 1985, my second year at UCLA. He came to do his book tour called "They Call Me Coach." 10 years after he retired and won the last of his 10 national championship. I did have dreams of playing point guard for UCLA, so I didn't achieve everything in my life. Okay, but it was being everybody gets scared, but you can let fear hold you back, and whether that fear is safety, whether that fear is the fear of failure, but most people even are scared of trying, and so. Um, I've always, when I got through officer candidate school in the Marine Corps in the summer of 1986, and you got to remember, this is 11 years after the Vietnam War. There were a lot of pain, a lot of reticence, a lot of bitterness. And there were a few Vietnam vets who were still in the Marine Corps. And I'm not sure that all of them were pleased that I was there
Right.
trying to become an officer and an aviator. It was also the summer that the movie Platoon came out. And Top Gun on the other side, very positive, patriotic Platoon. And there was certain portrayal of the Vietnamese in the movies. And you got to remember, UCLA, Francis Ford Coppola went there. A lot of movie Hollywood folks, and there was this certain portrayal of the Vietnam War, specifically the South Vietnamese military. So I went to officer candidate school with a chip on my shoulder because my father was still being captive, and they're teaching us that we didn't lose the Vietnam War. The South Vietnamese were cowards; they were inept, and so I had this chip that I was not going to be the kid whose parents were from South Vietnam to fail what then I believe was the hardest test in the Marine Corps. And so once I completed that, I was still scared of trying things, but I never had a fear of failure again. I think the second part was I noticed that everybody who was successful in America, starting with Hollywood, in the Marine Corps, and in business, as I got out, were very good communicators. They had mastered not only speaking English, but they're able to present, articulate. And so, I get asked all the time, what would you tell a new immigrant? Now, I would never say, go learn how to be ABC or save money. I'd say, well, learn English, learn how to speak, how to present, how to convince people. It's the greatest tool to be a communicator. And I tried really hard starting with time in the Marines. And so every time I made a leap from Marines to biotech salesman, from salesman to entrepreneur, and from entrepreneur to taking a company and forming everything to take it public on the Wall Street was, yes, you get scared. Yes, the fear of the unknown, but you still go through it.
Yeah.
Because it's part of the DNA. Some people are born with it. I believe I train myself in emulating. And I think in my book, I write about people who uh, I, admire, but I've never met. And so uh, I watch what they do. I listen to their tape. Colin Powell, the late general, the late Fred Smith, the founder and CEO of FedEx, who just passed away. Other biotech CEOs that didn't have the traditional track, 25 years in corporate America or 50 years or 30 years in the military. They had, I call it alternative career tracks. And that's what I try to emulate.
Right.
I call them the admirables, people who I admire, who I've never met.
Admirables. I love that. That's a clever take, but certainly one that resonates. I look for exemplars right now with AI being what it is on the campus where I work. It's almost impossible to keep up. Seems like there's a new tool or a new platform, something every day, and so it's almost impossible. And some might even say it is impossible for one person to keep pace. Whereas if you can find those exemplars who are embracing and using things well, that's really a way to fast track your learning so that you're not spending time on dead ends and things like that. So I love that, the idea of having admirables in your life. In your experience, what would you say is the biggest myth about success that keeps underdogs from breaking through?
The biggest myth is role model. I mean, growing up, they said, well, you have to have a mentor. You have to have a role model, somebody who looks like you that's made it. Well, I had zero. Okay. We were the first Vietnamese people, but there were Vietnamese people in America, mostly students and spouses of American servicemen that had arrived before the war ended. But that first wave in 1975, we didn't have CEOs. We didn't have entertainers to look up to. We didn't have religious leaders, So I think that's one of the biggest myths, the fallacy is you have to have a mentor or a role model because I had none. And they have to look like you, right? They have to be your same race. They can empathize with you. No, my admirals were African Americans, a lot of Jewish, successful Jewish people. I lived in Southern California. I had Jewish friends and did business. They weren't from my religion. They weren't my people. They weren't Vietnamese. So I think that's probably the biggest one. I try to find people who are kind, successful, good communicator, and gave some time back to either helping people or their community. Those are the kind of people that became my admirables.
Yeah, I love that. That really opens up a lot of doors of opportunity.
Yes.
Where you can pick and choose and identify with, again, the outcome, going back to kind of the athlete example. If someone can be successful in business with integrity, it doesn't matter necessarily what their background is. They still have some character traits that I can learn from. I love that approach.
Now, I think, when I looked at role model, I mean, I was a gym rat and I still get into the Y and play full court basketball at my age. I can say I was very proud. I was very happy. I was at Madison Square Garden during that run of Jeremy Lin's Sanity.
Yeah.
So I got to see him play. And then for those 5 or 6 games in early 2012, it was amazing.
Yeah.
And, it is one sport professionally that you don't see a lot of Asian Americans are, certainly in China and outside of America, but not in the NBA. And so when I saw him play, he's not Vietnamese. I was just amazed. And for those 6 games in that season, he put up numbers like Kobe like.
Right. Yeah. Well, you kind of alluded to this in passing in one of our previous questions. You have what you call the ER approach, effort and results, and it's kind of at the heart of your work. Can you share how you developed this philosophy and how maybe you've tested it and piloted it in your work today?
Yeah, so in my professional career in the Marines, work at Genentech and other pharmaceutical company, I would often find myself, if I didn't get the promotion or my peers, first you get is, you know, I deserve this. He or she got it because they knew somebody. It was never a look at yourself, myself included. And so I started looking back and saying, what was it that I wanted? Did I really want that promotion, or was I envious or jealous because somebody got promoted into a job that I didn't even really want? It was just deemed a success. You're with an organization, and in the military, you get promoted every couple of years. In the private sector, it doesn't follow every couple of years and you get promoted to lieutenant or captain or major or corporal to sergeant. So I was going down that track and I said, wait a minute, take a look at yourself. And I was in pharmaceutical, and there's the medical, the ER, the emergency room. And I started looking at, well, what were my results? What were my sales numbers? What kind of effort did I put into my job? Did I do X amount of sales call? Did I produce? Why am I feeling that I missed this promotion, or somebody got it because of favoritism or something? And so I put myself in that mode first. Then I started seeing some peers that were doing the same thing, kind of the self-pity, loathing, and complaining. And, slowly over 20 years, I saw the same with the entrepreneurial world. Well, I didn't get my business plan funded. How come this person got X million when we had the better drug or the better device or the widget? Then I went back and saw their presentation. I saw the way they presented, and I saw the effort. It didn't match up. And so I started thinking about, well, people panic, and instead of looking at themselves, they blame, either the economy, their company, their manager, or circumstances. So I start thinking, well, before you do that, just go to the VER, right? Because anytime you call a doctor's office and nobody picks up the phone, you get that message, right? If this is an emergency, dial 911 or get yourself the emergency. So I started putting the little acronym together, and I said, well, yeah, just go back and look at your effort and your result to see if it led to the success. But begin by defining what success meant to you. And I'll finish on this note on this question. Answer your question is that for me, early years with success was the Vietnamese community. As after 5 or 10 years in America, they saw young kids like me, success to the Vietnamese community, and affected, somewhat. You were supposed to go to college and go on to medical school or pharmacy, or, become an engineer.
Right.
So when I entered the Marine Corps, it not only surprised my non-Vietnamese family, it surprised a lot of people that knew my family. Even though we left that life behind after the war, like, what are you doing? This is not. And so I fought off what culturally, and a lot of my friends end up getting very good jobs early in their lives, making a lot more money as I made as a Marine. But success to me was not how they saw, the young kids in our community in the early years.
Yeah, I love that approach. There's definitely alignment with what I've taught and what I'm learning. I talk a lot about strategic and purpose, relentless in pursuit, better every day. And I was actually just using this week. So it's funny you mentioned a promotion. There's something coming up for me that I'm interested in. And I think the timeline's about 10 months. And with AI, we can now have a trusted advisor, completely confidential. So I went in and generated a Gantt chart, a growth plan. Like, I want to be the best possible candidate I can be 10 months from now for X role. What can I do? Uploaded my CV. It looked for holes, things that I could do to address potential deficiencies. And like you said, yeah, maybe someone else gets it, but I can't control that. I can control the controllables. I can max out myself. I'll be better in the process, whether I get it or not. And it aligns, I think, really well with your idea of your efforts and your results. And at the end of the day, once you've put those hours in the gym, the results will be what they may, and there's no shame in that, whether you win or lose.
I use the same principle not just in our company in my professional life, but also when I have fun. And one of my passion is golf, and it's. I think most people would tell you that it looks really easy on TV. The PGA professionals make it look good, so the LPGA, but it is very difficult.
Yeah.
to master or even be average. And so I think, for years, I would try to enter, amateur competitions and not do very well. I would just go to the driving range, watch some videos until about 5 years ago, I started putting myself in those pressure situations. And this is just, weekend amateur golfers having fun with friends playing in your local tournaments or your club tournaments. And it was when I put myself in those situations more often that the body didn't feel like, you go up and play tournament golf. It just feels a lot different than playing with
Yeah.
your friends. So the more I did that, the better I became under pressure. And it was not in front of thousands of people, just in front of, half a dozen friends. Uh, but you have to put yourself and your effort into that if that's what you want as the result.
Sure. And it seems like there's a lot of themes that keep cropping up, but that's another Kobe Bryant ism where he says, don't practice it until you get it right. Practice it until you
Mhm,
can't get it wrong.
mhm,
And the fact that fear evaporates when I know I've put in the preparation. And
mhm.
if I know I've done it 100 or 1,000 times in practice, when it comes up in real life, what do I have to be afraid of? I already know I can do it. And so I share that with my students all the time. Don't just practice it until you can get that exam question right or you know how to do that special test. Um, I think we grossly uh, or we grossly underestimate the repetition that it takes in order to really be successful. You've spoke. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. So part of that I learned in the Marine Corps was, in pharmaceutical biotech, we did role play, right? You're a sales representative. You're put in a situation. There's an actor or a physician that's helping you talk to your products. Well, you back up, another decade. I was in the Marines. We had a lot of training mission, real live uh, mission is called situational training versus just going out to fly a couple of hours or going out to the driving range and hitting ball for 30 minutes. We were put in situation with time, with resources, um, and see if we can meet the test. Can you get to the right landing zone on the right time with these resources and with this mission brief 55 minutes before you're supposed to be in the zone? So it was compressed, it was situational. I find those reality training situational scenarios, and I think it's very common now. It wasn't so common 25, 30 years ago, but I think with the technology, video, AI, you can put um, your employees, your athletes, even the young ones, through a lot of, and obviously you get all the statistics
Right.
and all the explanations on the other side.
Yeah, reminds me of that saying: the more you sweat in training, the less you bleed in battle.
It's very true.
That
Yeah.
notion of being prepared. You've spoken a lot about loving what you do until you can do what you love. And that's maybe an inversion of the way a lot of young people are taught, where they're taught to just pursue their passions.
Yes.
And that can lead to some dead ends and some unsuccessful pursuits. How would you say that's played out in your own life, and and how would you say others could apply that without losing their drive?
Well, early in my Marine career, obviously I joined the Marines and became an aviator, and I wanted to be an F-18 or Harrier jump jet pilot. Um, what I learned was that the needs of the Marine Corps comes before the needs of the individual, and every Marine helicopter pilot operating off a ship requires two naval aviators. And so the whole class got helicopters. So, I checked into Southern California. That is enthused. Uh, and so, yeah, I learned very quickly that people watch you, your attitude, your training, your performance, and that I was looking forward to getting through my tour and perhaps reapplying, and I almost got burnt. I ran into the wrong person, and for the first time, my career was at stake. Uh, Jump forward when I got to corporate America, everybody was talking about that next promotion, and I can see some people when they didn't get it, they forgot that they didn't excel at their current job; they were just average.
Yeah.
Uh, and so, before I left the Marines,
Oh, I
I
lost your
knew I
mic
was
there.
getting out. Yeah, uh, I knew I was leaving the service, and I knew that I could just take it easy and just go interview and just kind of transition out. Well, I took a very hard job my last year. I was the commanding general's aide, the executive assistant. So I interfaced a lot of people, went to war games, flew back in the back of an F-18 with him in Southern California, flew everywhere with him, and flew him in the Marine helicopter. What I learned was that because I did that job very well, it helped me transition to the private sector. I had interface with many officials, civilian officials, business leaders in Southern California. Uh, Going forward, 5 years later, when I was Genentech, the year that I thought about becoming an entrepreneur during the dot-com era, right? Everybody wanted to be a dot-com entrepreneur. I had my drugrep.com, my business, but I was at Genentech and I said, you can't just have one foot in, one foot out. They're paying you. Okay. So I ended up being the number one biotech rep for most of 1999, got a promotion, then resigned and started my new company. So what it did for me, it made me feel good that I gave my employer my full attention, did well. When I made the leap and went to venture capitalists, it gave me a great credibility that I never had been a CEO before. I had 5 years in the private industry. I had a business plan called mydrugrep.com that was going to revolutionize pharmaceutical sales. But when I told him I was the number one biotech sales rep for the number one biotech in the world, and I saw inefficiency in the model that the internet could solve, it gave me instant credibility. So, that period in my life, I learned that, hey, whatever you dream of do what you do really well. And so when you make that leap, you leave behind a good legacy. You leave behind a good foundation. People feel good. They didn't feel like you had one foot in, one foot out. And I think on the other side, I was advising a group of entrepreneurs, and a young lady had a career, 10-year career, and she wanted to do something, and she was doing it on the weekend, and she would leave work early, and I asked her a few things about a financial safety net. Because if you don't get funded, you're gonna have to go into your savings. And after all of that, I gave her the advice of you should stay in corporate America. And she got upset. 3 years later, I ran into her again, and she thanked me because some people are not ready, and it's not just mentally, financially, family. There will be a time, and you will know when the time is right. But the key message with that chapter in the book was love what you do until you do what you do, because it turns out well for all parties.
Yeah. Well said. And I think there's definitely that's a fresh message and an interesting take relative to what a lot of kids are being taught today, where it's just find your passion and go after that all out. I think there's an integrity piece to doing the best job you can at whatever season you're in. So a lot of times in these big transitions, I've encountered this before. Sometimes it's a push and sometimes it's a pull. I think we share in common that we were pushed out of competitive basketball. I would have loved to have played a little longer, but that door wasn't open for me. And then other times I've ran full steam ahead toward bigger, better opportunities. That's a pull. For someone listening right now who feels stuck in that in between, they're burned out, maybe they're overshadowed. What's one practical step they can take today that can help them reclaim their own vision of success?
I think is you have to just be, do you have your health and do you have your family? I mean, you're to me, I work in healthcare. I have friends who have been sick and gotten sick and have passed away as you reach a certain age and live in a certain demographic. The number one thing is just look where you are in life. And I think if you have health and you have family and a relationship, you are ahead. Okay. So I think sometimes it just takes a reality check. I know financial situation is a burden. A lot of people are having a challenging time right now. Once again, health and happiness to me are at the very top of the list. I think the next step you can take is you have to be active and learning. There's just so many tools right now. The internet's been around, 30, 30 years. The PC, Wi-Fi. Uh, you have to be current.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you get stagnant in your job, in your career, in your company, uh, if you're current, you can see it coming, and you can see even just sideways go to another company in the same role, because where you are maybe downsized or you don't want to move. I think geography is a big deal. A lot of people move around for job. Um, if you can find the ideal job and you live near family and friends, it's a big, big plus. Because I've seen people leave and they end up coming back to their hometown or wherever they had the most connections, myself included. I think it's fair to say that there's a chapter in my book where I face some great transition challenge. I think the COVID year was a challenge year for me. I've had the success, sold a company, and the COVID year was when I went through a divorce after a long, mostly happy marriage, and I had to shut down my drug company. We couldn't get funded. It was a tough time. Um, it was very challenging, but I stuck with my method, just do it right. We ended up studying the wind down appropriately, and investors were, I think, they weren't happy, uh, but there were a lot of respect there. You have to remember that as an entrepreneur, people invest in your ideas and your companies, and when things don't work out, they lose. You lose, they lose, but it's your responsibility to set it up, take it on success, get all the glory. And when it doesn't work, you have to do the right thing, and you just can't walk away and just leave things hanging. And somebody has to come in and clean your mess. Attorneys, accountants, do it the right way.
Yeah. I think there's so much wisdom in that, and it can be so difficult to know how to forge ahead when we find ourselves in the midst of, I call them purpose storms. And there's a bit of a healthcare analogy there. In the throes of looking for why I'm here, not really knowing whether I should take that opportunity or stay where I'm at. I came across the notion of a thyroid storm where our endocrine system goes haywire for no apparent reason. Sometimes these purpose storms can be triggered by events. You suffer an injury and your athletic career is over, or you end up getting downsized. I mean, sometimes that happens, but other times it can just be like an existential crisis, and we can't really predict when or even why that's occurring. Any advice you could give for someone who's maybe facing that crisis of purpose?
Yeah, I think they call it midlife crisis, late life crisis, early life crisis. Now, there's no more midlife crisis, right? The mid-career professional who just kind of like burnt out. First of all, I think careers and jobs are transient these days. The old days of spending 35, 40 years and getting a pensions are mostly over. And so, the 401k, everything's portable, and what you've earned and vested travels with you. So in a way, it's transportable. So are your skills, and so are your jobs. So I think somebody who is stuck has to realize there's a few things at play: um, health, happiness, finance, geography, and part of the happiness is relationship. I think part of one of the chapters I wrote about is when you have something that's open, it affects your life, whether it's a spouse, I'm sorry, a former spouse, you're dealing with divorce, separation, a parent that you don't speak with, a sibling that you don't have a relationship with. I suggest in the book, close that loop, because you think that, God, I don't care anymore, but it affects other parts of your life and your relationships. I always encourage people, as long as you're still on this earth, close that loop.
Yeah.
I think if people are stuck, don't bang your head against that same method. If you think you're going to be a XYZ in a certain career or a company and it's not happening, then take your skills somewhere else. Just don't get frustrated. And if it's something you don't want to do anymore, then just make sure you excel at it while you are doing the other research. But just always do best where you are, because things will be good when you go interview and they find out they didn't, the company didn't let you go because you were, searching for another job.
Right.
What were you supposed to do in your job?
Yeah.
It's not easy. I think you have to try a few different things.
Yeah.
But I think just doing the same thing over, I don't want to, overstate the definition of insanity, right? But I think people know that doing the same thing over and expecting, a different result.
Yeah. For sure. Again, talking Quang X Pham, the chairman and CEO of Cadrenal Therapeutics, also a U.S. Marine Corps veteran and a UCLA Bruin. So you mentioned the book. It's not your first book. So talk to us a little bit about Underdog Nation.
So in 2005, A Sense of Duty came out. That's about family, Marine Corps, trying to find out, make sense of the Vietnam War, and reunite with my father. So I always did want to be a one-hit wonder, one-time author. I always wanted to do a second book, and it was not going to be a personal book. But as I started writing Underdog Nation and the themes of coming to America and the last bastion in the free world, and it remains true 50 years later. People still are still coming here to Ukraine, Afghanistan, Iraq. There are refugees that are like in my shoes 50 years ago, and the message is still the same. This is life, happy, happiness is right here, but you have to earn it. And America asks very little of you. And so that's what I went back and looked at Underdog. And, I think I started the book talking about leaving Vietnam, but then I looked at American history. America was an underdog.
Yeah.
Just 250 years ago,
Right.
49 years ago, right? I joined an organization which was the underdog military, the smallest of the four armed forces. There's a theme, and there's the America's love underdog, whether it's a sports team or not. But when the underdog doesn't make it, it's forgotten. So, I always say it's okay to be an underdog. They'll root for you, but you gotta break through. You gotta get the hit. Okay,
Yep.
You gotta make it through Officer Candidate School. Your company has to make it. You gotta get a drug approved. So the journey continues, and I think in my speaker introduction, a young man helped me put it together. The real journey is not where you come from, but where you're headed, because it's behind you. So people ask me all the time about my past, and every time I get there, I'm like, my future, it doesn't look like my career track, right? Like you said, I jumped around, and I've had a very blessed life, Toby. I'm very grateful for this country and the people I've met, and the opportunities I've had. I'm just trying to share back. And if people pick up one or two nuggets, whether it's love what you do to you what you do, the ER analogy. I'd be very happy if people pick up one or two things that I put in the book. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you teed me up perfectly for my next question. Well, actually, before that, tell us a little bit about your day to day. You're with Cadrenal CEO. What does your work look like in 2025?
So I think the biotech, or what we call it, the drug development. Most of the thousands of biotech companies, now we're not talking about big pharma like Merck or Pfizer. Biotech drug development company are free revenue. We are developing molecules, whether the biologics or small molecule. The greatest thing is that our industry produces most of the innovation for the world. The drugs that come out of America, the world benefits from it. So I always share with our team, and I call it not my company, our company. I'm the founder, CEO, and chairman. It's our company. It's our team. It's our drug. We're doing it. The drug will be here forever. Uh, Unlike a regional, local, or national company, this drug is going to put warfarin, the oldest blood thinner in the world that's been around for 70 years, out of business. But we're not there yet. We need to do one more trial. So our day as executives of a biotech company that's pre-revenue is we have to advance the drug in the trial. We got to get the financial stability of the company, get the financing, the investment to do the trial, communicate with the FDA, talk to our intellectual property attorneys to make sure the pads and everything is valid for the drug. We want to protect it. Then we actually have to go and get investigators, and then find patients, encourage them to enter the trial, which lasts over 2 years, gather all the data, and take it to the FDA and say, this is the proof. These are the metrics the FDA wanted us to beat, whether it's placebo or warfarin. And that's how that's our day. It's around the five pillars, finance, regulatory, intellectual property, clinical trials, and not the last, but the number one is the patients. The patient doesn't care if you don't have the money or the financial market is bad. The need is still there, and so what we're trying to do is get our drug to Carfin it's a blood thinner. It's to help people who are about to go in dialysis to prevent them from getting a blood clot and they could die from a heart attack or a stroke. That's it. Very simple.
Yeah. Well, that's great. This one is unrelated, but I'll circle back and we will kind of touch in on that one again. I asked this one of all my guests. I love music and the emotions that it can frequently represent. If we were to watch a montage of your life, what song would you pick as the soundtrack to play in the background and why?
Wow, I'm a big I'm a big fan of The Clash.
Okay.
Every time I hear London calling, I remember Saigon calling. And so definitely The Clash would be playing in the background.
Gotcha. That's a great answer. I've not had a
Rock,
guest answer that.
rock the Casbah. Um, Big part of my high school, college years.
Yep.
It was just a great band. I think I'm a big fan of The Clash, big fan of Green Day.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so excited. My daughter is the second year in college, and we're going to see Oasis reunion at the Rose Bowl.
Nice.
And so it was her idea, and I think the whole generation of younger Americans growing up, they're coming back to that music, which was my music, in my 20s.
Yeah.
And so I'm so excited to go see the Oasis reunion concert.
Yeah. Right. No, that's tremendous. And the fact that she invited you makes that all the sweeter. I've got
Yes.
a son who's a sophomore myself, and he has not yet suggested a concert for us. So, Tay, if you're listening, that would really make my day. All right. Well, last one here. What for Quang remains undone?
I would say professionally to get this drug approved. Professionally, as at the top of in my list. That's the one. Travel, bucket list stuff. I don't have anymore. I saw things and done things. I don't have this wish list of I need to go see something or play golf somewhere. On the fun side, to win a club championship.
There you go.
That's two. It used to be to run a few marathons. I ended up running 16 of them in my 40s. About nothing material, no house, boat, or plane or anything like that. I traveled. When it goes back again, health and happiness at the top of the list.
Yeah. Well, if any friends or fellow club members are listening, look out. You are
like
coming
Deion
for 'em.
Sanders said, "We're coming. We coming. Yeah. I'm coming."
Yep, absolutely. Well, how can listeners connect? I'll point them toward the book if there are any URLs or addresses that I can.
Yeah, it's easy. Quang X Pham is my name, and I'm on LinkedIn. A lot of professionals send questions, and I try to answer a few things. Outside of LinkedIn is a website with my name, QUANGXPHAM. You'll see both books on there. You see my speaking topics. You see my intro video. Started with the helicopters and evacuation of Saigon, all the way to ringing the bell, opening the closing bell at NASDAQ, and we went public in early 2023. It's been an incredible journey. No other country could have afforded, and many people. This country has afforded many people. This is just one journey.
Yeah,
the opportunities that I've had.
Well, it's been an honor, real pleasure to speak with you again, Quang X Pham, serial entrepreneur, Marine Corps veteran, refugee from Vietnam, and now successful in so many.
I forgot to say one thing. The song that hit me the hardest was it's Floridian. I'm a Californian. I love Floridian. Tom Petty. We don't have to live like a refugee, 1978, and we don't.
It's funny you say that because I guess I was like, is this a Mandela effect, or did I really just not? The reboot of King of the Hill, Tom Petty was a voice of Lucky in that, and they said, several of the cast members, the voice actors had passed away, and they said Tom Petty, and I'm like, I did not recall that we lost him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right.
That was, I would say, one of my first few American songs that I learned that really hit me.
Yeah, I
Hey,
can imagine.
they're running a song.
All right. Well, last little bit, I always stitch this in. If you could just introduce yourself and say, and I am undone.
This is Quang X, and I am undone.
Fantastic. All right. I'll stop this right